you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
And welcome to Visiting the Village. My name is Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me this time, as ever, is the imperturbable Ian Hardingham.
It's always me. I'm always here, ready to talk about games.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
So Nintendo announced a console. It's called the Nintendo Switch. You might have heard about it. It's out on the 3rd of March. It's got 4 launch titles. It's going to cost £279.99. What do we think about this?
This was a bit of a problematic, I guess, yes. Is it an announcement? Further details, whatever this was. I guess a lot of people are complaining about the price. I don't have a particular problem myself, actually, with £280. I'd be a bit surprised if it was significantly less than that. As usual, it's really hard to criticise this console effectively because I still don't know where it's positioned. Is it the next 3DS? Is it the next Wii U? Is it something between those two? Is it just a random stab in the dark? You know, it's hard to do that. If this was the sequel to the 3DS, I think £280 might be a little bit much. But it's also got this dock, etc. I still, I just don't... I'm not that bothered by the price. I'm concerned about the battery life. The battery life quoted to be 2.5 to 6 hours. I mean, we heard similar numbers for the Vita. My Vita can go for 6 hours, and 6 hours is fine. 2.5 hours isn't fine. So that will come out in the wash. Yeah, only 4 launch titles. A Zelda that's coming out on a different platform as well. That's pretty bad. What do you think?
As you know, I wanted some clarity from this. I wanted them to say, this console is for X. And the problem is that they don't know. And I'm still terrified by that. And I think you have to be terrified by that if you're launching a big, expensive product and you just don't know where it fits. That's a problem, and I did not get a sense that they do. I definitely think it's expensive. There's a helpful infographic that someone tweeted with launch prices, UK launch prices of different consoles. And it's pretty expensive, as was the Vita. It's the same price as the Vita at launch. It's the same price as the Xbox 360 Premium Edition at launch.
That's a surprise to me, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it's more expensive than the Wii, the 360... oh, yes, and some other basic things. That Vita price, in fact, was the 3G Vita. So it's pretty expensive as these things go. It's getting up towards that £350 mark for the PS4, really. So, again, it's sort of like, it's expensive, but I don't know why. Nothing about this made me more confident.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's the PS4's launch price. So when this launches, you'll be able to buy a PS4 or an Xbox One for less money. So that's pretty interesting because the PS4 and the Xbox One are both significantly more powerful. Of course, they're not sort of primarily awesome tablet things, which is a premium product in its own right. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too negative. I'd like to put some games on this console.
Yeah.
But there was kind of... every single part of this announcement was sort of reasonably concerning. I think the games is an issue. I mean, this is not the first time Nintendo have launched a console with 4 games. The GameCube launched with 4 games. I don't know how many games the Wii U had. Having a Zelda is good, but obviously that is less exciting given that it's going to be launched on the Wii U as well. And Skylanders and Just Dance... not wonderful. 1-2 Switch, which is Nintendo's core product for this, that could be really good. I mean, they're great at making the launch titles for their platforms really amazing. So that could be really good. Part of this announcement was that they will have pay for multiplayer in the vein of PSN and Xbox Live. I'm not sure I would have put that in this announcement. I think they had enough bad news in this announcement. I don't think they had to put that piece of news in this one. People are complaining. They're saying that you will get free games with their pay for multiplayer service, but they'll only last a month, which I'm sorry is just incompetent. The system that PlayStation and Microsoft have, where you get a free game every month or whatever, and you get to keep it as long as you're paying a subscription, is completely ideal, both for them and for the consumers. And there's no reason not to do that. I mean, they're talking about giving you one NES or SNES game a month. There's just no reason not to keep that in the player's catalogue and give them incentive to keep subscribing. So I'm afraid I view that as incompetent. So a lot of bad news. I'm still going to get this thing. I'm still excited about playing it. But as you say, there was no clarity given here.
I think there's a few things going on here. I also still like it. Amazon apparently sold out of pre-orders. Like, they stopped taking pre-orders after the announcement today. So that's got to be a good sign. Maybe there is something in here that's going to appeal to... And this sounds like a terrible phrase, but I guess it is, like the Vita audience, the audience of enthusiasts who really, really like something. And that might be where Nintendo need to go. I was thinking about this when this stuff came out this morning, and I thought, well, there's a lot of things that you can criticize here, but if you're Nintendo and you have to make that choice about launching new hardware, how can you not do something that sort of doesn't really fit into a category? There's nothing within their arsenal that they can do. Using sort of existing technology is one of their things, going for a different form factor is one of their things, not competing on power is one of their things, that they always stick to. There's no other place to go. They can't just launch another portable console. I suspect if they do that, the next time they do it is going to be the last time they ever do it because of mobile. So maybe they've got that in the pipeline. And they certainly can't launch something that's going to compete in a PS4, Xbox One area. So I just don't know what I would do if I was advising Nintendo. So from that point of view, I don't want to be arrogant and say like, oh, this is dumb, it's not going to work. I definitely don't think that. I can just see all of these problems and I want to talk about them.
Yeah, it's a bit hard not to land kicks here, though, because there's so many weird things. £60 per game, that means the games are going to be as expensive. That's the RRP, but that's the RRP of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One games. That's a lot. £75 for a new controller is also a lot. It only comes with something like 32 gigabytes of onboard storage, which is pretty tiny. It's just, right now, a bit difficult to have much positivity for this, because it's not in our hands, we can't play it, we can't see how amazing it is. Yeah. I'm afraid that I'm really alienated by the whole Oblivion thing. People are so excited about Oblivion. It's like, okay, Oblivion is a game I've played before, and frankly, it's a game I could probably organise to play portably if I really wanted to, without having to have this. It's just kind of like, oh, look, Oblivion on a Nintendo console. It's not that much of a big deal, actually, in my opinion. Sorry. They also showed a load of footage from a new Mario game, Mario Odyssey, which is a great name for a new Mario game. This is a new three-dimensional Mario game. It's got quite a change up in art style. There's quite a lot of interesting, reasonably disruptive things about it. I'm not down on this. I'm not really a big fan of modern Mario, but this brand new Mario looks quite interesting to me. It looks a bit like Super Mario Galaxy, sort of on steroids. Yeah. Which is cool. But until I've got this in my hands and I can play with it, I don't know what else they can do to change my mind on any of this stuff.
I want us to be the naysayers here. I want it to come out and be a new kind of thing that just is cool. And I think that's the only way this is going to work. If the device itself is just great, like it feels nice to hold, it's kind of elegant, it's sort of tasteful in that way that people just want to own one, then it's going to work. But there's nothing unique about it that is going to compel people to buy it, as you say. Again, these titles are kind of things that are available on other platforms. They're existing things. There's nothing exciting in the launch lineup. That kind of thing has happened before to some extent, so I'm not too worried about that. I don't have a hook here, and that always worries me. So we said that enough, I think. 1-2 Switch is interesting, as a few people seem to have had access to this already. Julian Benson at Kotaku, who I was just talking to about this, he said this in his article. Milk, which is this game everyone's talking about where you milk a cow, is one of the mini games on 1-2 Switch, the pack of party games that should come bundled with the Nintendo Switch, but is madly being sold as a separate game. And I asked him why he said madly, and he said, "I think it was the best example of the versatility of the Switch's controllers. Nothing else on show at the event made it clear why the Switch hardware is different in a way that creates opportunities. All the games were things that work as bite-sized tech demos for the hardware, but I wouldn't recommend it as a full-price game." So he's essentially saying that he thinks the decision to make this a separate SKU is going to fail. And I'm really interested in that versus things like Wii Sports, which the inimitable Louis Proctor pointed out to me was a separate game, but also came with a controller. Like, I just don't know how someone can make the call that strongly that that's a strategic mistake.
If I remember correctly, I believe Wii Sports was a pack-in in some territories. And I could be wrong about that. But I thought it was something like in America it was a pack-in, in England it wasn't, all the other way round.
Also, if it's a separate SKU, retailers can bundle it. Like, I don't believe they're prohibited from bundling it.
Sure. I mean, this reminds me a lot of the GameCube. This launch lineup, which every single one of these 4 games has real flaws. There are only 4 of them. It just reminds me a lot of the GameCube. The GameCube had a lot of similar issues, and of course, the GameCube continued on to have sort of an alright life with a lot of fans and some really good games on it. I don't really have anything else to say about this. I mean, I really like the look of the hardware. I quite like the look of the games. Nintendo needs to be all in. But the problem that I have is that I'm kind of getting more and more alienated by stuff like Splatoon, stuff like the new stylings of the Mario, which just doesn't work for me personally. A lot of the stuff that I love from Nintendo, they've kind of got away from, and I've just got a bit of a personal thing for 2D games. I prefer 2D arcade games, just personally, and I find them 3D-ifying, or they do amazing jobs making Zelda 3D, making Mario 3D. But the end result is still a game that I like less than the 2D version. So I need to play it.
I guess I don't ever expect this kind of thing to be for me. I always see Nintendo as skewing younger and using sort of franchises that I don't really have that much interest in. So I kind of, what I want from them is to do something that I think clearly makes sense for that audience that is not me. And I don't see it here. I just... It's so vexing to me. I think I'm really sort of role-playing in my head what I would do if I was Nintendo. If I was Nintendo, I would definitely make something that is a massively expanded NES classic that allows you to play all of those virtual console games, N64 games, that is just something that people want to own that isn't very expensive, just giving you entirely devoted on access to their sort of older library. I think that would be a really interesting area to go down. Maybe make some original games for it as well. Maybe make some more cut down, actually 2D games for that, and then release that as a bundle at a certain price point. I really think that would do well. I can't think of any sort of actual commercial objections to that. I'd be really interested to see it.
Nice idea.
Why don't they do that? Who knows? Well, we await more news on this with interest. Again, I want to be wrong about it. I want it to break new ground. I want Nintendo to stay in the hardware game because they always do interesting and innovative stuff. So let's hope that it works. Amazon believe that adding features for streaming will be the next new frontier of innovating in games, much like physics and motion controls have been in the past. Do you think that's an overstatement?
Well, first, Amazon have bought Twitch recently, so of course they're going to talk up streaming. This is the kind of thing they would want to talk up. Having said that, I think this is kind of an interesting take. And you and I have spent a bit of time recently thinking about features for streaming. It's a really good way of enhancing the coverage of your game, and keeping up to date with that kind of thing is really, really important. So yeah, I mean, I basically think that, and maybe I'm out of date with this, but I think it's co-op functionality which is more important than like specific streaming functionality, because what streamers like to do is play sort of involving their friends while they're streaming. Now, as has come out of our conversations about specifically streaming features that, usually about getting your audience involved, there really is a limit to how much that can happen outside of sort of very, very gimmicky stuff. Whereas I think when it comes to actual co-op, there is no limit, really, and people are continuing to come up with very interesting new entire paradigms of things which somewhat involve one other person in your play experience that also work really well with existing game genres. So for me, I think that making stuff more interesting for streaming is as much about continuing to promote new avenues of multiplayer gaming that don't completely get in the way of single player stuff, as it is trying to find a way that sort of thousands of people can get involved with your game at once?
I think there are two categories here. I'm going to call category 1 streaming augmentation and category 2 streaming design. So streaming augmentation is where you add features to your game that enable the streamer's chat to interact with the game. They enable them to do a few little bits and pieces. They enable you to get data out of the game that you can display. They enable you to easily do things like matchmaking and so on with your co-op partners and so on. So that's stuff that you can put in that ties into Twitch, basically, and allows stuff to happen in the game. And I think that's great. I think those are really good features for an already successful game that has the core stuff to allow streamers to play it. So if people are playing the game already, you can go a long way adding that stuff. The second thing is Twitch or streaming design, and that's things like Twitch Plays X. It's things like quizzes where the chat can take part and interact with the streamer more directly. I think that is a rich seam of novelty game design. Short things that are going to be popular for a few months that involve a streamer and their audience, and I think that is underexploited. If you're a dev looking to make a weird novelty game that gets a lot of attention quickly, I think you could come up with a design that uses that sort of integration well. And I don't want to see these two things conflated because I think they're very different. What you said applies directly to the first thing. These are games that are already successful for streaming, and thinking about that is fine, but I don't think it needs to inform the design too much, whereas the other thing needs to be completely informed by streaming and the nature of streaming.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I totally agree with that. I mean, it's important to remember that I think it will always be the primary function of streaming to watch people play games that you as an individual can also play on your own. Like, I think that's always going to be the primary aspect of this. But just like any other entertainment medium, obviously now that you've got everyone together in this way, having fun sort of mini games like you talk about that takes a lot of audience participation is going to happen as well. I think you're right, that's underexplored so far. I don't know, it's one of those things where just, in fact, like physics and motion controls, after a lot of innovation has been tried, there'll be like 2 or 3 genres that work, and everything will kind of coalesce around those genres, but those haven't been discovered yet. So yeah.
Ding, my bell broke. Bethesda aren't planning any more Elder Scrolls remasters, according to their vice president, Pete Hines. Apparently Skyrim was an exception, because it was especially easy to do, given the work had already been done for Fallout 4. Do you think this is the right call?
I mean, it's made a lot of money. It's been very successful. I'm going to get in trouble for this. I don't think you need to go back further than Oblivion. I love Morrowind. I really do. I don't love it as much as people who really, really love Morrowind, but I do. I think that with Morrowind, you're getting to a point where it's inaccessible enough that you might have difficulty justifying the really significant outlay it would require to port it properly to modern consoles and try hollow laughter to fix some of the bugs in it. Whereas Oblivion seems like it's something that could both be ported reasonably easily, would definitely benefit from a bit of spit and polish at this stage, and as a lot of people who follow me on Twitter know, I'm afraid I do prefer Oblivion quite a lot to Skyrim, so I'd like to see that. But I'm never going to be upset when a games company says we're not doing more remasters. Remasters are fundamentally quite boring. I want Bethesda to spend their entire time making ridiculous new experiences.
I am going to take the opposite view here, and there's a couple of reasons why. I, as you know, hate money being left on the table, and I think that at least there is a good chance that both Oblivion and Morrowind would make around the same amount as Skyrim. Maybe not as much, but I think like a decent amount. And Skyrim has made a lot. This remaster has been ridiculous. So that's one reason. Now, I understand that it's hard to do these things, but Bethesda aren't doing something that other companies are, and that is working directly with modders. So there are people out there who are remaking all of this stuff in the most recent Bethesda engines. They devote their lives to it, and I think that there is a good chance you could hire a reasonable team of people to start maybe not literally recreating those games, but maybe making experiences based on them for official DLC or something like that, or an expand-alone thing that would give you like a bit of Morrowind-ness maybe with some of the original Morrowind missions, stuff like that, without being a literal remake. I think you could find a way of doing it, and I think you could make a good amount of money doing it. So you can provide some of that nostalgia without the entire sort of enormous effort I'm sure it would take to, say, actually port Morrowind. I think you could use this rich seam of money to make some good stuff.
Blimey, I wasn't expecting to be challenged to this degree at this time on a Friday afternoon. That's a pretty interesting idea. So, could you? You're certainly right that they're leaving money on the table, and it's fine to take different attitudes to what we would like this company to be doing, and that's fine. When it comes to sort of trying to get some, I suppose, you say modders, but you're going to hire these and become professional people to make sort of Morrowind themed Skyrim DLC. That's pretty interesting. I think you might be underestimating. A lot of content reuse goes on in these games, and trying to get something that feels very Morrowind might be quite difficult. I mean, some of these mod teams are doing a fairly amazing job. I'm kind of yet to be fully on board with a mod as being as exciting as a new game from a studio like this. They always seem to be lacking something. And especially if they're being hired by Bethesda, that may create some new problems. So I think that's a really interesting idea you've got there. It's going to take me a while to sort of think it through. I think there are immediately some problems.
Yes.
But it's always nice for people to try new things.
I think I'm under no illusions that what I'm suggesting would be very hard and require hard work and require some really, skillful management and setting up of parts of companies. But I really like, if you look at things like Long War, which I know is not directly comparable, but the way that Take-Two have brought that team into the fold for XCOM 2 and made it an official thing and really sort of, they've been led by their audience. So much of their audience went to Long War in XCOM 1. They both thought, how can we use that to inform the design of the sequel? And they've gone, well, Long War is a brand now, so we're going to bring that in and we're going to make it part of what we're doing. And it's that sort of, when your customers are really giving you a strong signal, which they did with the Skyrim remaster, they're saying, we have a lot of nostalgia for these games and we want to play them again on modern hardware. I think it's very dangerous to not listen to that. But also, obviously, I understand opportunity cost and then making a hard decision, technically it's too hard to do this, I think is fine. But I just wonder, can they capture a bit of the magic?
Yeah, I think Long War is one of the sort of most exciting new things a big development team has done in a long time. I really, really buy into that. I mean, yeah, all of those things sound. I think the one little nit I would pick with this is that I think an awful lot of what goes into an Elder Scrolls game is like modding. Because they create the engine and they basically say, make as many missions as possible, and you end up sort of scraping the barrel of the features to a certain extent. I think it's harder, is all I'll say, for modders to find fresh meat on the bones of an Elder Scrolls engine game than it is for being able to take something, like XCOM and creating a really different version of it. Just because so much of that content is made just part of the process, but that's just a nit, and that may just be wrong as well, but just something that came to mind.
Well, there's some interesting, that's true to some extent, definitely. I mean, there are interesting things you can do. Some of the more interesting, fuller mods that I've read about are, there's a murder mystery mod, which has a huge number of dialogue options and is set in sort of one location and stuff like that. I would like to see that kind of thing made more official, and we're getting away from my original suggestions here, but I definitely think they keep having this debate about whether they're going to support mods on consoles as well, and I just think I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in you making interesting content for me. I would play more Skyrim content right now if they wanted to get back in there and make new Skyrim DLC. I think they've got to be a bit careful with sort of leaving these things alone. I just think they need to be careful with it.
Yeah, in closing, I do actually think that sort of every development team should get a pet mod team, because just one sort of fairly cheap but very different lens on your game can turn out awesome.
That is completely true. And it's just a good thing for companies to do in general. These people are sort of mega, mega ultra fans of your product, if nothing else, and they can perhaps guide you towards the direction of some of the content that your community really wants, that you could get a lot of buy-in on very quickly. So yeah, completely agree. Graham Smith believes that tutorials are terrible and can be done better. In a post for Rock Paper Shotgun, he argues that games are inaccessible not because they are complicated, but because they have so far largely been badly taught. What do you think about that?
Full disclosure, I haven't read this article, I'm afraid, but I'm pretty sure I can talk about tutorials well, or at least I can certainly talk about them. I think teaching games is incredibly hard. I don't know if I think games have been badly taught so far. I think that basically it takes a certain amount of time to teach a person how to play a game. They have to not stop playing because they're so bored during that time. I think sort of more modern tutorial design is just about kind of making the tutorial stuff very, very linear and quite enjoyable. And in all honesty, I haven't really seen a way in which that doesn't work. If you're trying to teach Crusader Kings 2, you kind of have to rely on the fact that at a certain point you're going to grab the player to the extent that he wants to explore and find out stuff on his own. I think that there are a lot of games that are too impenetrable that could be made less impenetrable. You know, very, very linear tutorials for those games often turn me off, though. Like when I see that to play Stellaris or something, I have to play 20 tutorial missions, that's kind of a bummer. And I think, actually, that's bad game design, not bad tutorial design, because I don't think you should have to know that much to play a game in a basic state. I think it's much better when new features are optional to the extent that you can learn them organically. That's not always possible. But I'd actually be more keen to blame game design than tutorial design, often.
I think that kind of aligns with some of the things Graham Smith is saying in this post. I really felt that this idea, though, was generally coming from an incorrect premise, and that's this idea that anyone should be able to play any game. He says there's no reason that your grandparents shouldn't be able to pick up and learn how to play Crusader Kings 2. The reason they can't or don't isn't that the game is fundamentally too complex. It's that it does such a poor job of introducing its systems and concepts. Well, I just don't agree with that. I don't think it does a poor job of introducing its systems and concepts. I think it does the best possible job it can, given the kind of game it is. And I think essentially what you're saying, if you're saying things like every game should teach you to play while you play it, which is another thing that he says. Every game should be designed with the assumption that the audience has never played a game before. I mean, I think that's basically saying what kind of games you're allowed to design or not. I don't think that's about tutorials.
Yeah, I basically agree. I mean, I think that if we want to have the Dwarf Fortresses of this world, and to a lesser extent the Crusader Kings 2s of this world, we can't have that higher standard. I mean, I've got a book that I had to read, and I still don't know how to play Dwarf Fortress very well. And, you know, when it comes down to it, I basically made a New Year's resolution one year to learn Dwarf Fortress, and I kind of did. And it got down to the fact that I still love it as a concept, but it's actually not for me because of what kind of game it is. You know, you can't just be limiting people by saying your game has to be super accessible all the time. That's really bad. I mean, on the other hand, I will say that I personally am attracted to making extremely complicated and feature-rich games accessible because I think I like games a lot when they're very, very optional, where they're very opt-in. And I think that's attractive to lots of people when you see all of this complexity and you can choose whether to involve yourself with it or not. I mean, actually, Dishonored, as we've talked about, is a great example of this, where they've got sort of 5 different combat systems. And honestly, I honestly believe that people only play one of them. I don't mean everyone plays stealth. I mean that everyone who plays one playthrough of Dishonored basically only uses one of the combat systems. But it's really awesome that the other ones are there. And that's really cool as well. So
there's something that really concerns me about this, actually. And it's something that I've seen from some journalists. And it's this idea that you don't have to compromise. So another idea is that if you make a really, really, really complicated game, it should have no bugs in it. And that's just insane, because game development is about compromising. So if you want to make an insanely complicated game, you just can't have the thing where you don't have a linear tutorial and you let the player do X, Y, and Z, and you just can't. So what I really don't want is for this to spill over into not only reviews, but also players' perceptions of what games are able to do. I think if you're walking around saying every game should be playable by someone who's never played a game before, that fundamentally breaks some elements of user experience design. You know, when you're designing experience, you have to rely on certain things that people know already. For example, how to use a mouse. I mean, you can reduce this to absolute absurdity. If you say click on this button, you have to believe that someone knows what the word click means, and an older person may not. So I just think you have to be very careful with this kind of rhetoric, because the expectations you create could be completely unwieldy and really cause some games to get criticized unfairly.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Well, that's a turn up for the books. Hardware company Razer is offering a $25,000 reward for information on what happened to 2 prototype laptops that were stolen from the press room at CES. So I find lots of things to do with this really funny. Not least what this laptop looks like. Have you seen this laptop?
Yes, this laptop is it's what's called a triple screen laptop. You open it up and then you basically sort of take 2 screens out to either side of the middle screen, and you have kind of a little surround vision gigantic thing that looks a bit like an insect.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, this is how I have my setup at home. I have 3 monitors, and now I can get a laptop that does that. So I reckon the person that stole this was just like, that is the coolest thing ever, and they just became irrational and seized it and ran off with it, and now they're at home just giggling and fanning it out and closing it up again. So there's that aspect of this. The other aspect is I'm kind of surprised this doesn't happen more. Like, a lot of these shows are not the most secure place in the world. CES is massive, and I think it would probably be fairly easy to do this. So I'm just sort of surprised that you don't get more weird prototypes stolen.
This felt to me a lot like a PR stunt.
Right,
it seems like
right,
the kind of thing
right.
Razer would do, to be like, our new laptop is so exciting, we're offering a $25,000 whatever bounty for anyone who can track it down. It sounds a lot more like a PR stunt than anything realistic. Like, what are they expecting to have happen for their $25,000? I mean, what are they so worried about? Like, is there some part of this technology so amazing that Dell are going to buy it and be like, oh, this is how you fit 3 screens onto a laptop? Well, I don't buy it, sorry.
This is a good point, because if you look at their press release, at Razer, we play hard and we play fair. Our teams work for months on end to conceptualize and develop these units. We treat theft/larceny, and if relevant to this case, industrial espionage, very seriously. I mean, sure, I could buy this. This is
I'm excited. I'm gonna put a $500 bounty on someone having stolen the Frozen Cortex source code.
Oh, I'm actually going to do that. That sounds great. Well, we hope Razer get their laptop back, if in fact they do indeed need to. And this, another thing, it's very interesting. Razer have really taken over the power gaming laptop market from Dell. I don't hear anything about new Alienwares ever now. I just hear about these millions of crazy new Razer laptops.
Yeah, you're right. I think Razer's got a pretty good brand. And they've been kind of more into the thin laptops as well. Yep. Which I'm a little bit more excited by now. But yeah, you're right. They're not putting a lot of money into Alienware branding, I don't think.
I'm just surprised that is a lucrative enough market for anyone to want to compete in, because Alienware sort of seemed to stutter at one point. They were the only people really doing it. But Razer,
I mean, I do think it's kind of a brand thing. I think that's the, every part of Razer's brand is enhanced by them being like the go-to people for these really, really strong laptops. And I mean, obviously, while the gaming laptop market might not be that big, I do think that the mouse and even the mouse mat market is really big, and kind of doubling down on this element, as you know, probably does wonders for their mouse sales.
Yeah, it's certainly something that you wouldn't kind of come in as a new company and do necessarily. But the number of products that they launch in these areas, when a company comes out with like 5 or 6 variants on something, that means it's basically working. So it's just an interesting thing to see, and it's great, for us, because we have a lot of use from these more powerful laptops. I need to get one of the thin ones so I can actually go to GDC without damaging my spine.
Yeah.
Developers of the game Poncho put up a post-mortem of their game in which they didn't have a lot of kind things to say about their publisher Rising Star Games. This led to a bit of a back and forth between publisher and developer, played out through the comments section of mostly Destructoid. Now, we've seen a lot of these kind of disaster post-mortems, unfortunately, recently. Did you feel there's anything unique about this one, or anything new that people can learn from it?
No, it wasn't completely clear to me on a cursory reading which sort of how much fault there was. There's a lot of talking about Vita ports. This looks like a cool game. I'd quite like to play it on the Vita. It looks quite a lot like Fez. It's always sad when this happens. I think it's good when it gets out in the open, so you can see the issues facing everyone. I don't actually know anything about Rising Star Games as a publisher or anything else, so I don't have much to add really.
Well, Rising Star have been around since we were looking for publishers in 2006.
Oh,
I
okay.
think they were primarily based on doing imports of Japanese titles into the West, and sort of made money doing that, and now are kind of a semi-indie publisher, and their lineups look a bit odd to me. Like, I sometimes you can look at a publisher's slate and you can go, they're doing this kind of thing. With Rising Star, I just can't. I don't understand why they sign the things they sign. I guess in terms of new things here, I just think it's very important for people to understand that getting a game published is not a route out of anything. It's a decision that you have to make it really has to be a decision that you make based on the fact that you could make the game yourself anyway. Pinning all your hopes on a publishing deal in this way, for this kind of game, where it's something that you've demonstrated yourself is not really working, is not going to work. And I kind of see that happening a bit more now. There's many more sort of smaller publishers that people are able to access. I think you're going to be in a good place if you can come to a publisher with an idea that has a lot of potential, not something you've kind of put out in public already and sort of is flagging a bit and needs a boost. That's not really going to work. I don't think you're going to get a good deal. It doesn't look like they got a good deal. It also doesn't look like they understood the deal that they were getting, and that just caused lots and lots and lots of problems. Don't do this kind of thing in public if you have some kind of contractual problem with someone. And also don't respond in the comments section of Destructoid if you're a publisher who has had this done to them. The whole thing is a car crash.
Yep, I endorse everything you said that. Make sure you get a publisher who you can have a good relationship with. A great point saying, if you want, you're selling a product to a publisher, so it's best to sell it at its highest point of possibility, which for a lot of games is before they've been announced. So do that. Make sure you can have a good working relationship, and understand what that working relationship is, and don't go into a relationship with a publisher and then spend the rest of your life resenting them.
Yeah.
Because you did it because you had to and you hate publishers. That's just completely ridiculous. Generally, the kind of deals you get from publishers nowadays, as long as you do it properly, are reasonably fair and equitable. And be clear that the decision you made was done because it was the best thing for you and your game. And just, it's not going to be a business outcome if you're doing something as a last resort and you're going to be resentful for it.
Yeah, that's completely true. That's completely true, especially because you're not going to make that much money. With a really small publisher who is not going to take your game and transform it and do any of that, you're not going to make that much money from them. So you better be happy with what you're going to get and not have sort of unrealistic expectations. I don't want to toot our horn here, but we're trying to do something genuinely different with the way we publish games and the relationships that we have with developers that we work with. And every time I see something like this, where there's clearly been very poor communication from the publisher, no matter what you say about this dev team, it just makes me think that what we're doing is genuinely meaningfully different. And obviously, we are publishing games because we want to make money. But fundamentally, I think there's a way of doing it which is not only ethical, but also way more than that, that is a genuine partnership between a company that actually cares about what they're doing and what you're doing, and you making your game. So this makes me happy in a lot of ways with what we're doing.
Absolutely, I think we are doing a good job. I am going to toot our own horn.
Let's toot.
We're announcing our second publishing game in the relatively near future, and when we take on a game, it's a game that we're very excited about, and we get very, very active with the development. We embrace it, and we're not going to release it until it's great. And that's very, very important. And obviously, we have lots of other things on offer.
Yeah, and I do think that's genuinely unusual. So if you do want to work with the publisher, come and work with us. It's enough of that. Quite enough of that. Cypher Prime have had to cancel development on their sequel to music puzzle game Auditorium. Despite a Kickstarter and investment funds from other projects, they've run out of money to continue development. Does this mean anything in the grand scheme of Kickstarter?
I was just happy that this was covered without too much sort of crazy hand waving and screaming and taking off of one's clothes and waving bits around. This is a game that was kickstarted. They worked on it for a long time. They sent builds to their Kickstarterers, and then they ran out of money and they told everyone, the end. This is one of the ways a Kickstarter can end. I think it's perfectly valid. I actually do happen to believe that these guys tried their damnedest to finish this game as well. This Kickstarter was 2012. God, it's a long time ago. I've had both of my children since then. And so I'm just kind of happy that this was dealt with sort of relative sanity. I feel bad for these guys. I guess I feel bad for the Kickstarters, but it's kind of what you have to expect. The game looked kind of cool. Again, one of the first 3 rules of doing a Kickstarter is make sure you ask for enough money.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Like, it's nice to see this handled in a more workmanlike way. I just personally can't imagine doing a Kickstarter for an amount of money that would not let me finish something. I think I would be unbelievably mortified to be in this situation. But it is what Kickstarter is all about, and things happen. Sometimes you can't finish stuff. So, yes, I mean, I agree with everything you've said. We're very non-confrontational this week, apart from Bethesda.
Oh, it's early yet.
Okay. Game designers often manipulate luck in games in order to make things feel more fair or more interesting to the player. Simon Parkin wrote an article for Nautilus about this, and gives us some examples such as ball trajectory manipulation in Peggle and guaranteeing success after a certain number of attempts at the same battle in Civilization. What is your policy on luck?
Well, this sort of reminds me a lot of a big conversation we had about sort of guided events in games. And, we better start off by getting Fallout 3's auto-leveling out in the open to start with, I think, since I think that that's a big part of this. I understand that the core of this article is about, presenting a kind of a basic probability to the player, but then modifying it to give the player a better experience. Is that a fair thing to say?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in favour of it myself. I would prefer to have consistent, transparent systems for doing that. I mean, if you've got a game which someone just can't get past, sort of just making it easier after the 6th attempt feels pretty inelegant to me. I'm not saying it's not something you'd want to do. If you're making an arcade machine and you want to make money, that is the kind of thing you have to do. But certainly, I didn't know that Peggle did this... manipulated the balls bouncing off the pegs. If that's true, I'm sorry, but I'm never going to play Peggle again. That's like a complete and utter deal breaker for me.
That's amazing.
And anything that does that, in sort of certainly a game that sort of looks so overtly, physics based, that would be a no for me. So where do you lie on this?
I'm amazed that you're not going to play Peggle again.
No, absolutely not.
Even if you like something, you instantly don't like it if it's doing luck manipulation.
Sure, I mean,
Wow.
like that for me, it completely undermines. It's like you're putting a ball up. You're using your skill. I want the reward I feel to be based on a feeling that my skill has improved, and I've done something good, along with kind of the sort of the random luck which feels natural within the game. The idea that it could be changing the ball, and especially if it's based on me having had a bad or a good run recently, that, I mean, honestly, I'm not kidding, that just completely undermines my experience of playing the game.
But it's Peggle. Like, you don't want to become the international Peggle champion, do you? Like, do you care about how skillful you are at Peggle?
I guess I care about some process of what the game is actually like. Like, for instance, if I happen to hit, I don't know, 5 blue pegs and then bounce off the wall and something really amazing happens, it's not that I'm excited about that because of my skill. It'd be like, that's cool, I saw something really rare. But the idea then that it's not rare, that it was designed, I'm vehemently against it.
That's interesting. I mean, I just can't imagine caring about that, because for those games, I don't want to be good at Peggle. Like, I don't care if I'm good at it. I want to just play it and for things to happen and to have a nice time. It's a casual game, so I want to play it casually. When it does that sort of slowdown thing at the end, I've often suspected that it's like gonna nudge you a bit towards the thing. And honestly, like, I don't care that it does. If this was Rocket League, then I would think it was absolutely terrible, and I also would never play Rocket League again, because that's about competition and developing skill, and you kind of use it as a cipher for skill, your own skill development. It's about a human process, whereas this is just a different category of experience.
I understand that differentiation, but and I probably don't care whether I'm good or not at Peggle, because it is so completely random. But again, it feels like what a large part of what I'm getting out of the game is sort of having some small interaction on this kind of interesting physical situation, lots of interesting things sort of banging and lots of interesting lights going off, and it being sort of fun to watch. I just think that that's the wrong side of a certain barrier for helping me out. If it comes up with a message box that says, "You're struggling, son, should we just skip this level?" and it gives me the choice, I'm definitely cool with that. Right. I generally, even the casual games I play are very skill-based. I mean, the game I play by far the most is Bridge Baron. I wouldn't be happy if Bridge Baron started giving me better cards because I was in a bad mood or something, unless it was completely overt and it was something I could turn off. I'd like to know about it. I don't really want to be manipulated in that level. Now, I'm aware that you probably feel that that games are all about manipulation, that your entire experience is about being manipulated. And I guess that there's still sort of a line that I can draw there for which this is on the wrong side of.
Yeah, I mean, again, like systemic purity would matter to me in contexts where I feel it was appropriate and not in other contexts. I think there's some interesting stuff at the end of this article. Simon Parkin quotes this pinball designer called Larry DeMar, who avoided using the ball saver, believing it undermines the purity of the game. I think you'd get on with him. Jason Kapalka, who is the Peggle developer mentioned, countered this by saying, players almost always perceive patterns of manipulation where there are none. When I was working on online games, it was nearly impossible to convince certain players that the results weren't rigged. People came up with elaborate theories about how beginners were given better results so as to rope them into subscriptions, or veteran players would be rewarded with better results for their patronage, and so on. I just find that really interesting. Like, even if you're a purist, people are going to feel this anyway.
I find that interesting, but I find it sort of more striking that his response to that was to sort of give up and just decide to manipulate it anyway.
Yeah.
I find that kind of bemusing. The ball saver thing is interesting. I don't like it. It's a bit inelegant, but it is at least completely sort of straightforward. It's this thing lasts 10 seconds and that's it. Something that really annoys me, I own a Theatre of Magic pinball table, and there's something called the trapdoor. And if you go in the trapdoor, you get an apparently random reward, some of which are very valuable and some of which are not. And which reward you get is completely dependent on how well you're doing. That really bothers me, obviously. Now, the thing about that is, it doesn't completely undermine the game because it's still linear. It's like, okay, if I know what the algorithm is, I can go in the trapdoor early and get a better reward because its algorithm of what counts as me doing well isn't very good. So it's still kind of gameable, and it's still sort of in some ways linear and predictable, because it's kind of the reward you're getting is a function of when you go and get this thing. So I find that interesting. I mean, I certainly, to finish the Peggle thing, I think it's just fair to say that I would only ever choose to play any casual game that I felt satisfied my own personal needs for, I don't know, objectivity. So, I don't mind match 3, like very, very basic match 3. I don't mind Tetris. The more designed or sort of, I guess, some manipulative system it is, the less I'm attracted to it. So I kind of don't get very attracted to playing some of these more new and modern F2P games. Like there was that Titan Taps thing or something you were into. It just doesn't awesome. Attract me personally. So I feel like the Peggle thing, it's putting it on the other side of this line for me.
That's interesting. I mean, there's definitely a thing when you are a creative person in a certain field where you have things that you basically internalize as morality that are stylistic choices. And everyone that, like, every musician I know does this. They'll be like, this thing is wrong and no one should do it. And then there'll be other artists who just do that all the time. And it's totally fine. And I really like that. I like that. I think in order to successfully define a style in a creative field, you have to have this kind of very rigid internalized morality about things. I certainly do. And it's just like a sign of sort of artistic maturity in a way, to have those opinions. And those opinions can be, I don't think this is absurd at all, but those opinions can be absurd. And it's just interesting to see that in game design.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that kind of it is a large part of one's identity as a creative. You know, what you think is good and what you think is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
You know, if I was making movies, there are certain kinds of camera cuts that I think are unacceptable and wouldn't use.
Yep.
I mean, I do think it's sort of a bit more fundamental with this kind of stuff, and obviously, I think this stuff shows through in Frozen Synapse pretty well, and a lot of people appreciate that aspect of it. Anyway.
Interesting. Research company OpenAI have released the software they use to train autonomous driving agents using GTA 5. Now, anyone with a copy of the game can have a go at creating their own self-driving AI. I find this weirdly terrifying. Do you?
Yeah. I don't know if I think GTA 5 is the best place to learn driving. But no. Fair enough. It's something I'm boggled by. Maybe you can help me. Oh no, GTA 5 has been released to the PC, of course. It's always on the top of the Steam charts. Yeah, I was actually reading an article this weekend. I think it was by Kristen Donlan at Eurogamer, who I'll always have a soft spot for because he wrote a very nice review of Frozen Cortex. Anyway, his wife loves GTA 5, and I read the comments on this post, and just a lot of people saying that GTA 5 is the best game of all time. And I kind of just started reflecting on that and thinking that that's actually a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Like, I think it's one of the most viable best games of all times, and it made me kind of sad that I didn't get on with it, because I think if you can get to the state where you're really comfortable with GTA 5, you can just play it for so long and so many interesting things happen.
I need to play it again because I just did not. I mean, I think that's just basically nonsense from my own perspective of playing. I just thought it was badly designed. I would do all of the things that I get annoyed with people doing where they don't qualify very emotive, subjective statements about art. I want to do with GTA 5. I just thought it was bad. The writing is bad, the characters are bad, the world is bad, the art is bad. I just thought it was bad. So that's not acceptable. I need to get back in there and play it properly and try and figure it out. I didn't play online, which I'm sure everyone who loves the game would say, oh, you're an idiot then, clearly, because you didn't eat the chocolate. So I need to play it properly. But I'm really alienated by GTA 5. I just nothing about it appealed to me.
Fair enough. I mean, I was certainly, I was pretty alienated by the dialogue. I do like how it looks, but I'm just aware of sort of how many different things you can do in the game, and it's an interesting. I don't know. I have some respect for it, but yeah, I'd like to go back to it, maybe on the PC and see what happens. I
think the main thing for me, if I'm going to be a bit more specific, I didn't enjoy the feel of the character controls and the car controls. I felt everything was very heavy and sluggish. So it's probably just something that I needed to get used to those things, and just sort of actually buy in a bit more than I did. It's easy to bounce off certain things if you're in a bad mood with them or you don't buy their premise. So I definitely want to play it again. Maybe I'll start doing that soon.
Alrighty.
We've been doing content ratings for Tokyo 42 recently. This involves submitting your game to a huge variety of different ratings boards around the world. And it got me thinking about the idea of content ratings and how they work. So my question that I'd like to discuss with you is, should content ratings be based primarily on age, which they are mostly at the moment? Now, do you have any opinions on this?
Are you giving me an alternative?
Yes. So my alternative to this would be that they're based exclusively on content descriptors, which many of them have to do anyway. So you have to provide an idea of the level and nature of violence in the game, the level and nature of nudity and sexual content in the game. I feel like the age bands are things that are fundamentally unhelpful, and having to make decisions about things specifically to get into different age bands is a bit of an absurd process.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It reminds me of a... Oh, well, never mind. Basically, yes, I agree. I mean, on the other hand, this happens whenever you try and boil down something complicated to a simple rating. Like, there's often a rating, usually a qualitative rating, not an age rating, but in this case, it's an age rating. I mean, the thing is that parents just want to know what the age rating is. They don't want to have to work out whether semi-nudity and the occasional use of the S word is okay for little Jimmy. Like, they just want to be like, oh, look, I know nothing about video games, but this is okay or not okay, right? I mean, trying to make it more sort of granular. I mean, I do think that maybe one of the things that you're getting at is obviously different territories have different attitudes towards sex versus violence versus swearing versus blood versus religious iconography, that kind of thing. You know, and that makes it complicated. I'm not sure that removing the age rating itself and having like sort of ratings for those different things, that sounds a bit too complicated to me.
So there's two assumptions that you made there, which everyone makes. One of them is that this has to be more complicated, which I think is probably, but not necessarily true. And the other of which is that it's less clear than an age rating. And I really dispute that, primarily because a lot of people don't understand age ratings and they think they relate to how hard the game is. Anyone who's ever worked in game retail will back me up on this. This is this is like, you know, 3 out of 10 people will have this misconception. And a lot of the time, obviously, parents kind of ignore the age rating, but when they're shown the content or the content is described in a game, they go, oh my God, I shouldn't have let my child play this. So I think something that says extreme violence in big letters might actually be more powerful than an 18 symbol.
I could see it. I'm very taken with your explanation that people think it's like a board game age rating.
Yeah.
That's really amusing. I'm sure that's absolutely right. Yeah, extreme violence, extreme sex, extreme nudity. I kind of think it does have to be more complicated because, you know, it's still asking you to make a more complicated decision than is my child above or below this age, right? Yes,
but most parents actually make the decision based on what they think the child can tolerate. Like, in practice, that's what most parents do.
I guess so. I mean, I guess I still wonder if it's like a modifier. Like, if we talk about films, you know, a parent understands what a 15 is. Like, we all have kind of this vague idea of what a 15 is, and they're like, okay, well, my 14-year-old kid, I think he's fine, but when my 18-year-old kid was 14, I'm not sure he would have been able to cope with it. That's getting a bit subjective, though. I understand that. I mean, again, I think it's probably bad, and you may disagree with this, I think it may be bad for the game seller if it was more descriptive, because you can obviously hide a lot of stuff behind those age ratings, and 18, you know, it's going to talk to what the parent's preconception is of what an 18 rating is, whereas if it says, like, extreme sexual violence, it might be a no more often.
Right, and that's probably good, I suppose. But then, yes, there are difficulties in that if you have extreme sexual violence and it's well contextualized, that might be different from something which is very, you know, gratuitous and very sort of salacious and over the top. So yes, there's that problem. The other problem that people raise is at retail. Like, you probably legally need to stop children buying stuff. So, you know, then you have to test against their age. With this system, I think you'd have to have an adults-only thing. You know, if it's extreme in one of the categories, it becomes adults-only and you need ID to buy it. I just don't think you can get around that. But
I mean, when you said on the topics that, you know, should content ratings be based on age, I was wondering if you were going to suggest they be based on height or something, or weight.
Weight would be excellent, I think. Just to sort of round this off, I feel like with this stuff, there's a lot of people saying like, oh, it has to be an imperfect system and it's very difficult, and that means we shouldn't change anything. Well, I think that view is based on not extensively surveying the vast difference between all the rating systems in the world, because honestly, there are so many different takes on what is a rational way of doing this based on that there must be some room for improvement. Given the huge variety of different ways that different countries approach this, there must be some things that work better than other things. And I do think it would be nice to both consolidate it, which is what Peggy admittedly was, and Peggy I found to be one of the more rational ones, although they have their problems. I think more consolidation and a little bit more evaluation of whether it works would be good.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. I mean, I will finish by saying that I've always liked the BBFC ratings for films. I've always found them to be quite effective. I think after a little while, I had a really clear idea over what I was likely to be getting from various different ratings. And I do think that's helpful. Now, obviously, I think it's fair to say, do a lot more of a thorough rating of a film than these things do for a game. They have their members sit in front of the film and watch it. And it's kind of as much as anything else. Yeah, they have the checklist of what's a no at each level, but they also have it's sort of feeling based, like, how scared was I during this film, etc.
Okay. I pretty much disagree with all of that. I think the BBFC ratings have changed so much in my lifetime that I now don't understand them at all. I come out of movies frequently and go, I have no idea what rating that is, because I don't look when I go in, and it's always like a 12A, and it's got like a rape scene in it. And I just find them baffling. If I had kids now, I would not know what to tell them about age ratings. I don't think it's more thorough than games. Certainly with Peggy, you need to provide, I think it's a minimum of an hour gameplay footage, and you have to provide builds on every platform that they will play through, and you have to provide detailed instructions of how to access every single bit of content. So in many ways, it's at least similar, if not more thorough than
okay.
Than that
I mean,
rating,
I didn't realise they were playing through the entire games on all the platforms. Yeah, I mean, your point is taken on BBFC. The new stuff, I would be more lost in. I mean, I don't pay much attention to ratings anymore, but certainly when I was 18, before they kind of made everything younger,
12.
I thought I had a pretty good understanding of it, and I feel like maybe if I was 18 now, I would as well. But yeah, no, fair points.
Cool. Right, we got a special feature now, in lieu of Magic Corner, which seems to have sadly died a death, and potentially in lieu of the film and television lounge area, though we normally find something for that. I want to talk about audio. So there's this new product that's been released by Isotope, who make a bunch of interesting things. Isotope are a company that are focused primarily on mix tools. So I have to explain a few things before we get started. There is a type of plugin called a channel strip, and that is a plugin that you put on an individual channel within your track, and you use it to do things like compression and EQ and other types of generic mix processing. So tweak the frequencies, tweak the dynamics. And it's sort of a one-stop shop. You don't need to put in a separate EQ plugin, a separate dynamics plugin. So that's what a channel strip is. So they've released this thing called the Isotope Neutron, which is a channel strip. So in a normal situation, you have your track open, you have this on sort of every one of your channels, and you use it to do appropriate things to different sounds. However, this works in a completely new way, which is that all of the channel strips are linked together and kind of understand what each one is doing. You can then feed them an existing piece of music, which they will analyze and apply the appropriate processing to every single channel in your track to match the general soundscape, the general mix of your source audio. So it's basically intelligent mixing. It's called Track Assistant.
Sounds great.
Technology. And I was just really interested in this because this is one of the remaining holy grails of audio. It's a topic we kind of brought up before on the show, that in my life I've seen these holy grails get knocked down. So the first one was real-time pitch shifting and time stretching. Nobody ever thought you could do it in real time. Now everyone does it in real time constantly. There have been a few other things like that, and this is one of the last bastions, and it's just really, really interesting to see the first attempt really to do it. There have been other things which have tried to apply EQ, say, across the entire mix to match another mix, but that's extremely crude. This is kind of what you do with an engineer. You give them a source thing and you go, I want it to sound like this. I want you to make the drums sound like these drums. How well it works is a bit debatable. Reviews are kind of saying that it can be a bit wacky, but it's generally very interesting, and I just wonder how much of this stuff we're going to be able to automate in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good for you to find out exactly how well it works. I think it's probably bad news for mixing houses. With my very limited understanding of how these things work, the mix does seem like something you could maybe automate, but then if someone also said to me, there's some stuff going on in there that's too complicated, I can imagine that as well. I mean, audio tech is going to keep improving, and in some ways the barrier to entry for making great music is going to continue to fall.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few different things. So obviously something has to exist with the mix that you want in order for it to copy that thing. So that's one sort of slight issue here. The other thing is that the EQ, the secondary processing that you apply to a sound, is vastly less important than the sound you choose to use, because you're boosting or reducing frequencies. So the sound has to have a lot of those frequencies in it to start with. When you'll get you'll really start challenging what recording engineers do, is when it will be able to automate the sound choice. So you'll be able to play a song and go, I want a guitar that sounds like this guitar, and it can actually make that happen. Or I want a snare sound that sounds like this snare sound, and it will just generate the sound for you. That's the really, really tough thing to do here, because that's a combination of so many different things. And I might go as far as to say as that's impossible, but we'll see whether it is.
Okay.
Music. Enough. Games that were released this week in 2007, thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy. It's Miss Pac-Man on Xbox 360. It's just called Miss Pac-Man. I'd love if it was a direct port of the original arcade.
So would I.
And nothing else. Lost Planet Extreme Condition on the Xbox 360. Lost Planet was that Capcom
that's right. Kind of was mildly intrigued, but never played it.
WarioWare Smooth Moves on the Wii. That was a good WarioWare, wasn't it?
I believe it was.
Tokobot Plus Mysteries of the Kakuri. Don't know, don't care on the PS2. World Snooker Championship 2007 on the 360 and PS2. World Snooker Challenge 2007 on the PSP. I wonder why that has a different name. Maybe it's...
So do I.
It has less content. Bionicle Heroes on the DS. There's a very funny Twitter account that tweets extensively about Lego Bionicle lore and will occasionally confront other people on Twitter with assertions about Lego Bionicle lore. I'm sure you can find that if you like such things. Children of Mana on the DS. Children of Mana, I believe, is a famous JRPG.
Yeah, it's a classic old RPG, that's for sure.
So was this a remake for the DS?
I think this was basically a port, like a remaster maybe, but basically a port. Because I think Children of Mana is either a SNES or a Mega Drive game, so it's kind of graphically fine for the DS.
It didn't get that good reviews. Maybe it was a bad port. Spider-Man Battle for New York on the GBA. That's
still getting GBA games.
Interesting launch timing, and I want to see what this looks like. It got reasonable reviews from some places. Oh, it looks really bad. It looks really weird. It's like a side-scroller with 3D
Am I going to have to Google this now?
Yeah. It looks so weird. Wow.
Oh, wow. It looks great. Well, I think some of these might not... Well, I'm seeing a lot of screenshots, some of which definitely aren't on the DS. Well, maybe they are.
I don't know.
I don't.
Well, anyway, it looks like this really looks like a Game Gear game. Wow.
Oh, man.
Incredible. I was so excited by that I closed the show notes.
Oh,
and
no.
I'm going to try and recover from that.
Well, on the 15th of January 2007, a game called City Life World Edition was released for the PC, which is a stupid name for a video game.
There we go. That's the end of that. I've since recovered from my excitement. Let's do the top 11 UK Steam games. At number 11, it's Defiance VBI Ultimate Pack. What in the seven hells is that? Let's have a look. Make your home in paradise with the... Hang on. What is this? It's a content pack for the game Defiance, which I've... Wow. Okay. I
Looks like Gears of War.
I don't know. Elite Dangerous Horizons Season Pass at number 10. Number 9 is Total War Warhammer, still there. Elite Dangerous Vanilla is at number 8. Number 7 is NBA 2K17. Number 6 is Total War TM Warhammer Registered Trademark Realm of the Wood Elves. Number 5 is Sid Meier's Civilization 6. I'm getting bored already, man. I'm just looking up this list, and this is a boring ass list. Watch Dogs.
I'm bored too.
At number 4, Planet Coaster at number 3, Tropico 5, a complete collection at number 2, and Watch Dogs 2 at 33% off is number 1. That is boring. Let's move on to your listener questions, which are less boring but more ridiculous. Binster asks, dirtiest robot, and I'm not going to answer that. Several Bats on Twitter asks, how do I make a Fury of Dracula game take less than 5 hours? Oh my god, are we just dumb hunters? I'm not going to answer that either. Don Camus says, what's the best way to future-proof games that need a server to run? I'm guessing you've thought about this due to Frozen Synapse 2.
But yes, you make sure that you're not a dumbass and you use a domain name, not an IP address. And if you're really clever, you allow yourself to remote patch it as well.
There we go. Simon Walters asks, in the Cars universe, are the new cars designed and made, or are they born? Which I think is a meme from something. And
I'm not sure that they've asked the right people that question, but I appreciate it.
I dislike being associated in any way with all of you. That's the end of this week's show. We hope you enjoyed it. I'm Mode7Games on Twitter. He's Ian Hardingham. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.